about the evolution of the humane movement in India. Probably the most beautiful word in any language ever uttered came from the Rig Veda, the word ahimsa, which means non-violence in thought, word and deed. And though I say here it's only 5,000 years old, the Vedas were an oral tradition and people believe it existed for over 100,000 years before it was written down 3000 BC. So it's much more than 5,000 years old. And the same concept was repeated when the Yajurveda, one of the other books, was written. It says, no person should kill animals who are helpful to all. By serving them, one should obtain heaven. And the Atharva Veda, more or less, repeats the same thing. I was just telling Professor Phillips that one of the most beautiful verses in the Quran says, there is not an animal that crawleth on the earth or a bird that flieth with its wings, but the same is a people, like unto you. So all religions preach the same thing. And even if you don't believe in a God, there is some power that powers the universe. In 1000 BC, the Mahabharata has a beautiful story in which Yudhishthira, who was the king of Hastinapur after the battle of Kurukshetra, he sets out to go to heaven. It was probably Mount Kailash he was making a trip to, but in any case, the story says that he left for heaven with his wife and his 4 brothers. And as soon as they started that journey, they were joined by a dog. A regular Indian street dog, if you will. And as they kept walking towards heaven, one by one the brothers died, Draupadi dies, and Yudhishthira finally reaches heaven with only the dog. And Indra comes out and opens the door and invites Yudhishthira in, and then adds, your dog can't come in. And Yudhishthira says, if my dog is not going to be allowed into heaven, I'm not coming in either. And this is from the Mahabharata itself. It's a written story which is at least 3,000 years plus old. Then the dog, of course, changes into Shiva, and the story goes on and says that the ideal king is somebody who is described as one who protects all creatures in the kingdom. And this, around the same time in the Bhagavad Gita, it says, those who are wise and humble treat equally the Brahmin, the cow, the elephant, the dog, and the dog eater. So we also know that dog eating did exist at least 1000 BC. "400 years later, the 23rd Jain Tirthankara, Neminatha, looks out one day and sees all the animals that have been brought together for the feast that's going to follow his wedding. And then he refuses to get married, takes monkhood, and goes away into the forest. Both the Mahavira and the Buddha taught compassion for all living things, and their entire religion is really based on non-violence, ahimsa, and reverence for all life. 300 BC, this is really the Bible of the Tamilian, at least, but most South Indians, the Tirukkural, where the ethical behavior is described in about 64 different stanzas. All of them talk about non-violence, compassion, a compassionate lifestyle, and says a compassionate lifestyle involves living without killing animals and eating meat. And the Manu Samhita, which all of us are supposed to be following, says the same thing. It says you will not find happiness in either life or in death if you injure innocent beings. All the saints in the south, the Shaivites, the followers of Shiva, the Vaishnavites, those who follow Vishnu, Mirabai, Tulsidas, Surdas, Jamboji of the Bishnois. The Bishnois are the people who protect the forest. These are the first tree huggers in the world. These are the ones who insisted that a film star who had shot the black buck be prosecuted and who are still following up on that case. Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, spoke on vegetarianism and on compassion and reverence for life. In 1560, coming a little closer to today, when King Akbar of the Mughals inherited his kingdom at the age of 13, one of his first acts, he inherited also the zoos put up by his father. One of his first acts was to provide spacious enclosures for all the animals, basically much more is basically open air enclosures, not cages, and huge cages for the birds with large built-in reservoirs for water. In 1600, the Ahmedabad Dabla Pinjarapole was started. The Pinjarapole is a retirement home for old animals. A Goshala is really a cow shelter for old cows. A Pinjarapole is for all animals. And this was the one which British soldiers in Ahmedabad saw, went back to the UK and influenced Richard Martin sufficiently that he started the RSPCA in 1824, based on what the returning soldiers had told him about the Ahmedabad Pinjarapole. And as we all know, or we should know, the RSPCA was really the model on which the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals started a few years later. The first SPCA in India was the Calcutta SPCA in 1861, 160 years ago, followed soon thereafter by the Bombay SPCA in 1874 and the Madras SPCA in 1877. And while the SPCAs are there to prevent cruelty to animals, a lot of organizations had sprung up in the old days around the same time, like the Bombay Humanitarian League, which spoke positively of the promotion of kindness to animals, not just the prevention of cruelty. In 1890, we got the first Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act in India. It was brought in by the British, and it provided some amount of protection to animals in India. Many of you will be surprised to know that between 1953 and 1956, if you read this book, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a number of charters were drawn up by the World Federation for Animal Protection Associations on animal protection, on a Universal Declaration of Animal Rights. And in all of them, there were more than one Indian present. In one case, out of the 9 people who brought out that declaration, 3 of them were Indians. In 1956, a member of Parliament, Rukmini Devi, a very well-known classical dancer, she was a member of the upper house of Parliament. She introduced a bill in Parliament, the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Bill. And after the first reading, the Prime Minister, Pandit Nehru, came to her and said, "This is a very, very important subject, and it's hardly becoming that it should be a private member's bill. I would request you to withdraw your bill, and I promise you that my government will bring in an identically worded bill." So the bill that we actually have today, though everybody refers to it as Rukmini Devi's handiwork, was actually the work of the Government of India. Pandit Nehru brought it in, and it was passed in 1960. Just before the PC Act became law, I was one of the founders of a small group called the Blue Cross of India. It became the Blue Cross a little later, but it was initially known as the Animal Aid Association. In '64, we registered this as the Blue Cross of India. And it was the first of a new genre of animal welfare groups. We were concerned about cruelty to animals and how they were used in all fields, in entertainment, in the production of food, in animal experimentation. We spoke about marine mammals, we spoke about zoos. As I said, 1960 we had the PC Act come into being. In 1972, we had the Wildlife Protection Act, which basically prevents the hunting of any animal which is in India. And while the WPA, the Wildlife Protection Act of '72, was not the first in India, I'm sure that almost nobody here, with the exception of one person, knows that the first law in India banning hunting was brought in by the princely state of Cochin. It was an independent princely state in India in 1929, which was basically the same wording as the Wildlife Protection Act. And in 1976, India became probably the only country in the world where the Constitution makes it a fundamental duty of every citizen of India to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, wildlife, and to have compassion for all living beings. Professor Phillips said, what is a definition of an animal? The Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act says an animal is defined as all living beings other than man. We have a lot of firsts to our credit, but there is a dichotomy in India. While we have some of the most fantastic laws, they are seldom implemented. We see amazing amount of cruelty everywhere, including goshalas. In 1986, the Blue Cross brought out what was probably the world's first interactive computer-based dissection programs to stop dissection in schools. And while most of you are people who are working with animals, let me tell you something. Biology was a compulsory part of my school education too for my senior Cambridge. And I went to my principal and I told him I will not do dissection. And he said, you know, if you don't do it, you'll lose 6 marks. And I said, it doesn't matter. And he let me do it without the dissection part. In 1972 onwards, when I kept going to other schools and asking them, not one school refused to stop the practice of dissection. And we had to go to court and get it stopped much, much later. But in any case, we brought out these programs, 6 of them, and in 1990, the Swiss League Against Vivisection bought 3,000 copies of each of the programs, and they stopped dissection in Swiss schools and gave these as an alternate to dissection. In any case, when we talk about alternatives to dissection, let me tell you one thing. Dissection teaches you nothing. Dissection of animals teaches you absolutely nothing. You see a mass, what does it tell you really? It teaches you non-respect of life. Biology is supposed to be the study of life. We can't study life by killing. And at school level, it is totally unwarranted. And the fact remains that today, no school has dissection. And I don't think any of our children have suffered as a consequence. 1996 to 2002, we saw a plethora of rules, regulations, laws coming in. Mrs. Menaka Gandhi became the environment minister, and she got the animal welfare portfolio. Rules for animal experimentation came in, the ban on wild animals in circuses, change in the rules for performing animals, slaughterhouse rules. SPCS was to be set up in each district, and in spite of the Supreme Court of India directing that every state should make sure that SPCA is set up in that district, hardly 25 to 30 districts have done so in the last 30 years. In 2001, India had one more first to its credit as far as the laws go, when the government ruled that the only way to control the street dog population was by a massive program of catch, vaccinate, spay and release. And they stopped the killing. 1997, the CPCSA, the Committee for the Purpose of Control and Supervision of Experiments in Animals, began to implement their guidelines governing the use of animals in research and enforces penalties for non-compliance. Why I mention the word enforces penalties for non-compliance is because on October 4th, 1968, the government of India brought out a set of guidelines. Very ironically, it was St. Francis of Assisi's birthday. He's the patron saint for all animals. And they brought out a set of guidelines to govern research in the country. Unfortunately, they were never followed by any of the research institutions here. In 1998, the government banned the use of 5 species of animals: monkeys, lions, tigers, panthers, and bears as performing animals, which meant that all circuses using those animals had to give them up. The government set up special rescue centers for these animals, and we rehabilitated every one of the surrendered animals. The circus owners naturally went to court, but the law was upheld by the Kerala High Court. Most of the circuses in India are based in Kerala, a southern state. In 2006, a group of film producers went to the Bombay High Court against restrictions on using animals in films. The Bombay High Court not only ruled that the rules had to continue, but that any film wishing to use animals must get a no objection certificate from the Animal Welfare Board of India. The Animal Welfare Board, by the way, is a statutory body set up under an Act of Parliament, and we are the only country in the world that has an Animal Welfare Board. We are certainly the only country that has an Animal Welfare Board of India, but in 2007, after the Asia for Animals conference, a group of the most active animal welfare groups in the country started the Federation of Indian Animal Protection Organizations. They have been working very actively, and one of their recent, I won't say victories as yet, has been the fact that the government has said that no animals should be used in any circus whatsoever. So it's not just the 5 species anymore. In 2011, bulls were added to the notification against performing animals to end the barbaric cruelties of Jallikattu and bullock cart racing. Professor Phillips mentioned about the responses of an animal to its welfare being threatened. It has 2 options. One is fight, one is flight. The bull is a very, very, very timid animal. Before the Jallikattu event, you will find 800 to 900 of the bulls tied up outside the arena. People are just walking through them, feeding them, patting them. And the most ironic part is, the season, as they call it, begins on the 15th of January after our harvest season. That's the Thanksgiving equivalent over here. In the morning, the first thing that all these families do is perform a Go Puja, which is a worship of the cow. And in the first thing in the afternoon, they go and torture its mate in the bull ring. The Animal Welfare Board fought for this. Between 2011 and 2014, the Supreme Court had directed that every event using bulls be monitored by independent groups. And in those 3 years, over 1,900 people were injured, over 65 bulls died, over 400 people are said to have died. We know that about 100 died, And the rest, after the events were over and the people were rushed to hospital, the newspapers never follow up. Many of them had their guts coming out and their chest punctured by the bull, which had no choice but to fight with them. We have had some fantastic rulings from the courts. In May 2011, the Gujarat High Court ruled that every bird and animal has the right to move freely, which meant, in effect, that we could not have the battery system of chicken anymore. But did it stop? Pets in lifts. 2013, India became the first country in the world to ban dolphinaria. In 2014, unfortunately, 2014, we started off in May by having a landmark judgment, probably one of the most amazing judgments given by any court anywhere in the world as far as animals are concerned. This case came up because one person whose son had been killed in a Jallikattu bullfight event went to court. The case was not filed by animal rights people, was not filed by the Animal Welfare Board, are taking place. Biting the tail, stabbing them with knives, putting chili powder in the anus and in the eyes. The worst kind of torture you can think of. Because the animal was terrified to go out into the arena where there were 50,000 screaming drunken louts. They said if this kind of cruelty can take place, when everybody and the organizers especially know that every action of theirs is being filmed, is being photographed, is being videographed and being recorded for submission to the court, can you imagine how bad things would be if these things were not being done? And they gave a landmark judgment banning the use of bulls for racing, for bullfighting. They used to have the Dirio in Goa, where bulls butt each other. They are forced to butt each other till one of them falls down incapacitated. In September 2014, the Shimla High Court ruled that sacrifice of animals is a violation of the PC Act, because the PC Act clearly says that nothing in this act shall apply to the slaughter of animals for food as prescribed by any religion. It did not involve sacrifice for the sake of sacrifice. Well, a lot of other things. In 2015, a lot of animals used to go to Nepal from India every 5 years for probably the largest sacrifice in today's history. The Gadimai festival, where animals used to be marched several hundred kilometers from India, because most of the people going to Gadimai in Nepal were from India. And the Home Ministry took particular interest in this. The Supreme Court ruled that animals should not go from India. And they still went. There were still a lot smuggled over. But the number of animals killed came down to about 5,000 as compared to the 25,000 to 30,000 in the previous slaughter which took place 5 years earlier. In January 2016, the Rajasthan High Court ruled that Tonga races, that is, the Ben-Hur type chariot races with horses, are banned on the concrete roads in the state. In 2017, the Ministry of Environment and Forest issued some more new rules. And so I now come back to this. How far have we really evolved? There was absolutely no doubt that we evolved a great deal. But then in the last few years, we have seen many of these acts being overturned by the state legislatures, which, in my opinion, are blatantly illegal. And ultimately, while the Jallikattu ruling of 2014 will be upheld, in the meantime, this year, in Tamil Nadu, they had bullfighting for the first time in 3 years, we lost at least 63 people. And thousands were injured. Thousands. In many cases, in many events, over 100 people were injured when stands collapsed, when the bulls ran amok through the crowds. So, that is now in the Supreme Court once again on appeal. We have tried to, when I say we, animal welfare people as well as the Animal Welfare Board have appealed for the review of that particular act in Tamil Nadu. Rekla racing is also back in some parts of the country. So while I stop now, if anybody wants to ask any questions, you're most welcome to do it. There was an organization called the Bombay Humanitarian League, which did amazing work in the 50s and 60s. Nobody even knows what happened to that organization. The Animal Welfare Board has a lot of records now, so we can at least trace back the events from 1962 onwards. But before that, a lot was done in India, which we don't even know about anymore. Any questions?
Yes, now things seem to have gone backwards. Why is that?
Well, the simple answer is that there is no political will to enforce what's happening. In many cases, because of the federal structure of the country, the implementation has to be done by the local state governments. The center can only pass the regulations and the rules. If the state government doesn't do it, they have to be pulled up. The fact remains, for example, that about 10 years ago, the Supreme Court ruled that every state must have a state animal welfare board. Almost no state has done it. Uttarakhand is one of the few that did it. Tamil Nadu has just now set up a board of about a week ago with everyone there a government official, with the chief minister at its head. As you all know, a government official will nod his head when the chief minister tells him to do something. And this has only come in because the Jallikattu case comes up in January, and they want the State Animal Welfare Board to endorse Jallikattu this year again.
They are using elephants for some festival purpose. So when we read, we saw that while coming from forest area to this festival, the animals' body weight, whatever it is, it will be very less. After coming here, within a month or 15 days, whatever, they will get good food for the feed. Their body weight will increase because everything will be noted there. And even what I have seen, so many animals which they are using for races and other purpose, Kambala, what in Dakshina Kannada, Karnataka they are using. The animals will, the bulls, buffalo bulls, they will be given privilege, like they will be living royal life, what I have seen. So it should be banned. Maybe Jallikattu is it is a reality, but some other rituals or traditional activities, they are not cruel to the animals.
Empire of the husbands. They included child marriage when children as young as 4 years were being married. Tradition is no substitute for true culture. My culture does not include cruelty. We are all hardwired into having reverence for life. An elephant belongs in the forest, not in temples. We do not keep our gods in chains. Have you seen a temple elephant unchained? Have you ever seen a temple elephant unchained? And you still think just because we give it food, it's enough? Have you seen the way it behaves? Have you seen a stereotypic action of shaking its head from side to side? And you still think that just because it's put on weight, it puts on weight because it does not do exercise. An elephant is supposed to walk many, many kilometers every day in search of food. Have you seen the sores on its legs? Have you seen the puncture wounds on his body where the ankush is used? Have you seen, do you think they are living in dignity? You've heard of the 5 freedoms? Freedom from pain, suffering, hunger, natural behavior. Is that natural behavior for an elephant? It should be banned. And it will be banned in the next few years. There's absolutely no doubt about it. There are already several cases in the Supreme Court against elephants. In Goshalas.
Dr. Devas, next talk is of Animal Welfare Board of India coming.
See, the government appoints the board. Finest laws in the world, bar none, and they are never implemented. Yes, ma'am.
Each
teaching them, training them, creating awareness, and improving their livelihood through livestock farming. I think that part of the history part is also required to be taught, apart from simply the facts that have been passed by Parliament and the ruling of the court.
Okay, for the Welfare Board, its slogan has been human welfare through animal welfare. So you look after your animals better. As long as you're going to look after them better, you're going to get more productivity from the animal. As farmers are concerned, we have not done much. The Animal Welfare Board itself has not done very much. The individual organizations have not, because unfortunately many of the organizations which are looking after the animals in the rural areas are basically only goshalas taking in cattle which are not productive anymore. Because cattle have a special place in the hearts of many people in India. As far as I'm concerned, a cow is a pig is a child. They're all the same.